And now we are going to move on to cybersecurity and sovereignty. Thank you.
It's true, because when we speak about these topics that are digital, we have to also speak about security and look to all that's been happening in the world. And in Portugal, we've been the target of many cyber attacks. And that's the topic, cybersecurity and digital sovereignty. Our next speaker is Sir Alex Younger, former chief of the MI6. He was an officer of the Secret Service and Intelligence on Her Majesty's service for 30 years. He's served in Europe, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan. He was the director of the fight against terrorism, head of the Secret Services between 2014 and 2020. In 2019, his contract was extended during the negotiations for Brexit on behalf of stability. And so he became the oldest chief of the MI6 in 50 years. Let's listen to Sir Alex Younger.
Hello, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
So thank you for inviting me to the conference today. I'm sorry I can't be with you for real. It sounds like you're going to have a fascinating conversation. You might ask what someone like me has to add to that conversation. I think there are a number of contributions I can make, but the most important is to convince you that you are not just discussing technology. When it comes particularly to cyber threats, it's not computers that are attacking you. It's not computers that are defending you. It's people, and people who live in the real world. It's the human dimension that matters, I think, above all. And of course, I come from a human intelligence organization. But the threats and the opportunities lie at the meeting of people and machines. And I urge you to think about it in those terms.
What are the drivers of digital sovereignty in today's world, and which are the main threats?
Well, thank you. I think this is a really important question, because the world we had, which was essentially completely interconnected, is now disconnecting. And we need to accept that this is a new reality. Individuals are demanding more control over their own data. States driven by legal jurisdictions like the European Union increasingly are putting privacy at the heart of everything they do, for reasons I understand and support, and that will require data to be separated and curated in a different way. But the most important trend I want to highlight is the ideological divergence that is taking place. The idea that China would become more like the West as it got richer, which I think we all shared, has proven not to be true. And instead, they are intent on decoupling and building a separate infrastructure, politically, ideologically, of course, but also in the technical space. We can expect them to work to dominate the key emerging technologies of the future as a matter of national security, and they've said this, as a matter of dealing with the productivity problems of an aging population. They've said this, but also, of course, because the political system requires control, not just of data, but of information, and has to be behind what we call the Great Firewall. And I think essentially we will see the world dividing into different technospheres as a result. And our firms and our clients will increasingly face difficult choices as they try and operate in both systems. And this, of course, is a threat to everybody's business model, but it's one that we have to confront.
How do you think governments should approach the issues concerning cybersecurity from a geopolitical perspective?
This is another really good question, because of course the two are connected. I very sadly forecast increasing degree of geopolitical tension in our world, and the horrific consequences of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine are of course just one but very vivid example of what is going on. So there will be increasing levels of geopolitical competition, and by and large that competition will be mediated through technology and in cyberspace. So cybersecurity and hostile cyber activity are becoming increasingly important in the way states interact with one and another. What can governments do? Well, I'd highlight three aspects. First of all, we need to work together to try and create some framework, some legal framework that essentially provides rules of the road. Now, I am not optimistic this can be done at a global level. There is no consensus about this. But certainly within our value system, I think that's an important step for us to take. We need to work together to attribute attacks. So when we receive malicious cyber activity, we need to react. We need to do it together. So we must achieve unanimity on the origins of these attacks, much more accurately and quickly than we do now. We need to work to build up the resilience of our domestic infrastructure. There's no point in having amazing cyber capabilities if you are vulnerable to attack. And by and large, I think Western societies in particular remain with significant vulnerabilities, and government has a job to do to build up the resilience that we need. But my final point is that we must not introduce moral hazard. Government cannot do this all for themselves or for us. Actually, we all have a responsibility to boost the resilience of our systems. Government can provide the information, but they mustn't take away the responsibility that we all have to make our contribution.
What are the major international players which concerns you the most when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, obviously, in the current situation, I'm going to say Russia. Russia has been adept in using cyber as a tool for propagating its interests for many years. And of course, in Ukraine, up until the invasion, it was the place where they applied all of their new techniques, particularly around supply chain attacks and offensive cyber operations to achieve political objectives. Now, when the bombs are falling, maybe cybersecurity takes a backseat or cyber methods take a backseat. But sadly, I predict that when, as I expect, this war reaches the stalemate phase, Russia will want to use all cyber tools to try to create new options for itself, and will want to do it more widely than Ukraine. A really important point to note about Russia as well is it is host to most of the ransomware criminal gangs who have attacked us in the past. And it's an exaggeration to say that the Russian state is behind these activities. I don't think that's true, but they do, by and large, allow these things to continue, and they could stop them if they wanted to. I think those gangs will, at some stage, be put to use by Russia in these circumstances. And I expect, as a result, ransomware attacks, albeit politically motivated, to increase. We've got a lot of other issues. China is engaged in large-scale IP removal, if I can use that term. Iran is particularly adept at what we call offensive cyber, disruptive operations. And North Korea is acting to finance itself by the use of cyber techniques and extortion. So there are some very, very active states in this space, all of which present in some ways different threats.
What are the major cyber risks that we as a society face today?
The big one is, of course, systematic risk. So we can all deal with instances of intrusion, and we can all deal with even quite severe attacks. But when these things are connected one to another, then we, all of the organizations represented here, all of our clients, and as countries face a very significant risk. And my concern is that the technology trends are generally towards hidden systematic risk. We see increasing entanglement of platforms and supply chains that make it very hard to predict how one event will cause another. And of course, in all of the new technologies that are enriching our lives, so AI and Internet of Things and quantum hyperconnectivity, we see practically exponential increases in the amount of data that we rely on in a way that we do not understand. So the risk is both hidden and increasing. And as a result, I don't think we're responding to it in a way that the seriousness demands.
What is the role of intelligence agencies to protect democracies and societies from these threats?
Well, that also is a very interesting question because of course, this is my background, and I want to be really clear that we carry a significant part of the responsibility here because we have the knowledge to see what the opposition are up to, and we have some tools to deal with it. But the most important thing, I think, that the West, for want of a better word, has on its side is the capacity for teamwork. If we work together and if we share data, then we will be far stronger. So the model of secrecy that intelligence services use necessarily and need for their work has to be matched by an obligation to inform. One of the things that I think has been extraordinary about the Ukraine war is the way in which Western intelligence services have used secret information to inform the public about the risks that are coming down the track. And I really welcome this. And I think the same has to be true in cyberspace. So intelligence services need to use all of their traditional and modern methods to uncover threats, but they need to find ways of having conversations with the public that help you more broadly respond. And I think in the UK's example, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is actually run by our signals intelligence organisation, GCHQ, but has a public-facing side that talks about the threat, we see a really good model for the future that I think could well be adopted by others. The other aspect, of course, is in some cases, intelligence services can provide a deterrent effect. And it's easy to feel passive and helpless in the face, particularly of the ransomware attacks that have taken place. But in fact, in the case of the Colonial Pipeline attack, which was at one of the most serious end of the spectrum that took place last year, it was remarkable to see how US agencies subsequently were able to fight back. And in this case, recover a good deal of the ransom that had been paid through cyber means. And watching, as I do, the reactions of ransomware players in Russia and elsewhere, it was dramatic. Suddenly, they understood that they could be made vulnerable by their activities. Suddenly, they discovered the risks to them and their livelihoods of what they were doing. And it was very, very heartening to see the way in which the conversations changed. So intelligence services can't provide a force field that's going to keep everyone safe forever. They need to cooperate with the public to make this real, but sometimes they can take action to make the attackers realize that they can't have it all their own way.
One of the issues is lack of trust in the information we receive, coupled with a certain worrying level of digital illiteracy. What can we do as citizens to better inform and protect ourselves?
Well, look, I have a very basic answer to that and a very general answer. And the basic answer is this. You should patch your software, so update it regularly, and use a secondary form of authentication. If you do those two things, you will be in a stronger position than 80% of the individuals or firms or other organizations in the cyber world. It's remarkable how much of this is just about following really basic standards. And we should be heartened by this fact. Basic cyber hygiene methods can make a profound difference. On the issue more broadly, though, of the quality of the information that surrounds us, I think this is absolutely fundamental. There is no doubt that malign actors are becoming increasingly good at manipulating our information environment for political ends. And of course, I have broader worries about the way in which social media operates, insofar as it is a polarizing force rather than one that brings us together. These are huge issues. I know you're going to talk about them more during your conference, but we as democracies can't go around asking the government to tell us what's true and what's not. It's about us. It's about the level of education that we have. It's about our genuine willingness to search out alternative points of view, and about a readiness to educate ourselves about discerning truth from lies online, or at least understanding the origin of what we are exposed to. And I think that's kind of the most important point that I have to make today. We need to recognize that the internet is being used in different ways for different political purposes, including geopolitical purposes, and that we need to be literate and understand that and take individual responsibility for navigating our way through it.
Was the M character in the 007 film inspired by you or any situation you have experienced?
So I was not M, I was C. And this is an example where life follows art. So of course, I find it very frustrating because the real world of what we do is very, very different to what you see in the James Bond films. In truth, most of the time it's more boring, and some of the time it's a lot more interesting. And that is the truth of it. Of course, the way in which the fictional spies work is a bit frustrating because it doesn't always put us in a good light and it sends a misleading impression. But what I would say is this: it massively increases our power, because people think that we are behind every rock in the Middle East. People think we have extraordinary capabilities. And it means particularly that MI6 is nearly as famous as Pepsi. So I am not going to complain about the free publicity.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was a privilege to have you here today with us.
Entrevista de Sir Alex.
So that's the interview to Sir Alex Younger, the former chief of the MI6. And we start about this important topic in this day and age, all the dangers of cybersecurity. I have Pedro Barbosa, responsible for Cyberwatch and CEO of Maltesers, the cybersecurity department of SIBS, and we also have António Gamay Marques, the Director General of the National Security Office, the National Security Authority in Portugal. Hello to both of you, good morning, welcome. And I'm going to start with you, António Gamay Marques. We've just listened to Sir Alex Younger, the former chief of the MI6, and there are some topics that I'd like to raise, bearing in mind the parallelism that we can find with Portugal concerning intelligence services. It's interesting, it happens always in police systems. I think there is the need to have interaction with the public, because intelligence services need to know what the public thinks. There has to be someone to explain to the people what is happening. So what do you think? After having suffered from a cyber attack in a large telecoms company, that's Vodafone, do we know what we ought to know about what happened? Good morning. I hope you can hear me well, says the speaker. The interpreting booth cannot hear the speaker properly, so we are afraid that whatever we interpret will be somewhat distorted. We all collaborate every single day. This collaboration is seized from the needs of our activity. Our organizational structure is different to the British one. In the UK, as Sir Alex just said, the National Cybersecurity Centre has a public face We are not hearing the speaker from the interpreter's booth. This is a structure within the Foreign Office. Antonio Gabriel, we apologize. With the structure that we have, that is obviously different to the British one, especially bearing in mind the dangers involved and the risks inherent to cybersecurity in both countries. My question is about our efficiency. That's where I wanted to tell us. Are we more preventive or more reactive? And do we know all that we ought to know about the cyber attack to Vodafone? The cyber attack on Vodafone had an impact on our lives. They are being investigated by the technology cybersecurity team. This is part of the state structure that has to respond to this. The National Cybersecurity Center, together with the Cyber Security Unit to combat cybercrime, are working to coordinate the response to cybersecurity events. And that is one of our main missions. There is another on the prevention side that we invest much on, because as Sir Alex said, I agree totally, we have to invest a lot to train our citizens. It's not only Sir Alex who mentioned this, there were other panels that incided on this topic. The panel on democracy in the digital world also insisted on this, and that's our context. We have a program funded by the Resilience and Recovery Plan to train in cybersecurity in the entire territory in partnership with several universities. I'm not perhaps answering your question, but it's not my responsibility as Director General to respond to these topics. Well, you have told me that you coordinate the response. So from the moment you know that a company is being attacked, the response in the case of Vodafone, was it swift? I'd like to have a swift answer. The response, considering the number of customers affected, we consider was an exemplary response, including communication to the people. It was exemplary. We think other institutions, other businesses ought to use the way in which Vodafone addressed its customers, always keeping the people informed and leading the entire response. It's an important reference, and that's the swiftest answer I can give. Mr. Barbosa, regarding what Mr. Gamel has just said, regarding what Sir Alex also said, we have the war in the Ukraine and the pandemic that has made people much more aware to the digital world, and people had more time for all sorts of things, even for fun and games. Do we have a greater risk, not just for the fun and games, but for more serious things? So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I dare say yes, and moreover, as the other panels have addressed, we are living in a world of great transformation. We've had 2 very special years that have led to a change of paradigm in organizations worldwide. Organizations had to adapt in a record time to carry on their operations and businesses. And they could not, of course, approach all the aspects of the businesses, and security did not follow all these changes in organization. There are many SMEs that had to adapt to e-commerce, but without awareness to all these issues regarding cybersecurity. And speaking about e-commerce, so people ended up by using the internet to sell their products and services, because all the shops were closed and everyone was fearful of going out shopping. So which actions were taken, or what risks were envisaged? Was there enough information? Did you look for information? Or what was the role of SIBS in all of this? Speaking specifically of the organizations, they had to do things in a record time. And so the awareness curve regarding security did not follow all these great changes, which was in turn an opportunity for many threats to be enacted by the fraudsters. Yes, we had an increase in the number of fraud situations. There was a change of paradigm. All that which was the perimeter of an organization was became more dispersed and more open to such attacks. So access to corporate files, the way in which work was carried out, or the support of your colleague next door ceased to exist. This led to many changes, and criminals made the most of this opportunity to do their evil. But going back to your original question, we've more or less transitioned from a time of transformation to a new challenge in geopolitics. And as Sir Alex has conveyed to us, the war in Ukraine is something that doesn't make us understand what the real threats are that existed and continue to exist. So in the weeks before, they were there, but in a less visible way, because the bombings were superimposed on these cyber threats that are still there, and they happen every day of the week. So the danger is out there, and the danger will increase, because once we overcome this stage, these kind of actions will nevertheless continue, be they more or less visible. We managed to suppress some attacks, especially with the groups that have been identified by the great technological players. We can understand that there was a set of new malware families that were addressing critical infrastructures. Some were averted, but others not, because they're so silent. So that's the new paradigm that we're going to face in the coming years, knowing that there are states which have great skills and certain political motivations. Yes, political motivations, financial motivations. As Sir Alex Younger said, we cannot blame Russia for everything. There are other states that have such attitudes. But asking about Portugal, if we wish to compare to other countries, not only in the European Union, but worldwide in the West, our businesses, are they more or less exposed compared to others, especially SMEs? Thank you for your question. We have published some data on our website according to which when Portugal joined NATO, cybersecurity incidents increased. In the last 4 months of last year and the first 4 months of this year, we have statistics about fraud. That's the terminology we use. Fraud is a set of incidents of cyber attack. This was the one that most increased. Regarding your question, I would like to distinguish between this group of companies into two clusters. Some are clearly well prepared. We've mentioned one already. And what we have witnessed is that the companies go all the way from being well prepared to poorly prepared. The question is, in case of attack, those that are well prepared manage to recover and not lose out in the end. Those that are not prepared do not manage to recover totally, and they lose information forever, especially if they did not take into account that such information that was so relevant for the organization and the business was kept in analog systems. So this is a lesson that we have learned from all these cyber attacks that happened in Portugal since the beginning of the year. It's a fact that some companies are well prepared and invest a lot in cybersecurity. They suffer from attack. They know why, how, and how to recover, and they are back online as soon as possible. Do you have any clues as to the profile of the attackers, the so-called hackers or crackers? Are there any indemnity suits? Or is this also subject to confidentiality? Not necessarily. I can tell you what I can tell you, and I won't tell you what I can't. As to the profile of the attackers, surfists like to surf the waves. And if there's a good wave, they'll go for it and enjoy it and ride on it. With the COVID and the war in Eastern Europe, there are profiles that like to surf on these waves. They like to show off how capable they are of infringing attacks. So they may be eventually hired because they are experts in cybersecurity breaches. There are companies, there are entities in the dark web who are recruiting this kind of people to offer ransomware services. There was a case in a large hospital in Portugal, an example of this. But as Sir Alex said, sometimes it's something very simple enough to check the capability to react efficiently. So what could be such a simple thing? Simple things that I've mentioned: to have multi-levels of identification, to have the software always updated, to train collaborators regularly so they may be prepared. There may be theft of credentials or illegitimate or illicit access to systems that cause harm. And we've seen this on the news, yes, especially to warn citizens about the problem. And make sure that everyone knows it's not something that's going to happen to someone else. It can happen to anyone. I think the work carried out by the media is important because it's by publicizing this kind of news, it's a way of socializing. It's pedagogics. Yes, thank you. It's essential. Pedro Barbosa, I'd like to ask you to speak about the Center of Security Operations of SIBS. What are the technological solutions that you have that support this security system center to mitigate potential attacks? The Security Operations Center, that is operated by Multicert, a company under SIBS, it's focused on monitoring and detecting and responding to cybersecurity breaches. We have a 24/7 team working closely to monitor the entire system, and has been referred even the more mature organizations that have already traveled towards cybersecurity maturity may eventually be exposed or affected by these new situations. So that's why we need proper preparedness to counterattack swiftly. And we are specialized in monitoring, detecting, and responding to cyber attacks in a 24/7 logic, because all these people that we mention are making the most of the opportunity to make a profit out of it. So we have the National Center, whose mission is very well defined to protect the organizations all the way from critical infrastructures to any organization in general. Antonio Gameiro, some time ago you said that about communications, we could not guarantee full security for communications between the President of the Republic and the Prime Minister. I'd like to ask you now if this still holds true. If the Prime Minister and the President of the Republic were to have a conversation, would they have to meet in a private room without cell phones? Once again, the sound feed from the online speaker is too low to follow him. We may not interpret because of this. It is a technical issue that is outside of the hands of the interpreter team.
Possível tecnologicamente elevar muito o nível de segurança entre duas entidades, e nós estamos a trabalhar nisso.
Sim.
Estamos, inclusive, a recorrer à tecnologia portuguesa para fornecer isso às entidades governamentais, em parceria com o CEGER, com o diretor do CEGER.
Once again, we'd like to remind you that the lack of interpretation for the online speaker is due to the fact that his sound feed is not sufficient for the interpreters to be able to hear him and follow him and translate his words.
E esse software é escrutinado por nós e é certificado pelo Gabinete Nacional de Segurança para Nacional Reservado. Eu tenho sempre por mim que não confio.
Portanto, vale mais ser preventivo do que reativo.
So it's best to be preventive and not reactive. So I'd like to ask Mr. Barbosa for a quick answer. In your opinion, the borders are defined to respect digital sovereignty. Do we have actual digital sovereignty? We have a long way to go. I think that the borders are not well defined, and this goes beyond issues to do with cybersecurity. But there is still a long way to go, and Europe has a long way to go, as we've seen in this and previous panels. In our day-to-day, we are flooded by systems. There's all sorts of data out there that's outside of European hands. I think we have a long way to go. We have actions to undertake and focus on these topics, but at least we have managed to see some figures. So the same question to you, Mr. Gameiro.
E se calhar vai chocar algumas das pessoas que estão a ouvir, eu considero que a Europa não tem soberania digital. Está a trabalhar para reganhar alguma soberania digital através da regulação, através da certificação de produtos e serviços em cibersegurança, exigindo que, mesmo que seja produzido o bem ou o serviço fora da Europa, ele cumpra requisitos de certificação e só a partir daí é que pode ser comercializado dentro da Europa. Mas veja, por exemplo, questões de cloud. A Europa não tem um cloud provider próprio. Se for às estatísticas de cloud providers europeus, o primeiro aparece para aí em 10º lugar e é uma empresa alemã. Então nós vamos guardar os dados de onde decorre a informação, a sabedoria e o conhecimento em service providers que não são europeus, mesmo que os centros de dados estejam na Europa, mas os dados podem estar na Europa. Os metadados estão na Europa ou estão noutras geografias. E, portanto, porquê que o projeto Gaia X não levanta voo?
António Gameiro,
Mr. Gameiro, we're in the last stretch. As you know, there's been an agreement of the Constitutional Court that is raising many blisters because it's questioning several trials for cases of terrorism or drug trafficking, in which we need to know where the people have been and on which dates. This is not tapping phones, it's corruption. It's this kind of data or metadata that may be questioned because the Constitutional Court think that privacy is more important than security. Do you agree or don't you? I agree. And you, Mr. Barbosa, do you agree or don't you? I don't know. I don't agree. Particularly the so-called hackers have been useful in many research cases. Are they criminals or are they heroes? Of course, it depends on what the court rulings say. Can they help the police? They're not heroes. And the answer is not black or white.
Não é único. Não é uma pergunta que possa ser respondida com esta ligeireza.
é complicado. Pedro.
It's not easy to answer the question, I know. Mr. Barbosa? We'd have to spend a lot of time talking about this, and it's what's standing between us and lunch. Thank you very much. It's a very hot topic that we shall have to further develop. But as of now, the mission is to go back to Mr. Faria. So after cybersecurity, a fascinating topic that needs further discussion.